So, great movie, as we all know, Forrest Gump. I'm just gonna show a few clips here. Just got a point to make, I promise. We should all remember this. Notice the television in this clip.
What's going on? Coons are trying to get into school. Coons!
There goes the TV again. Someone watching a TV.
Here by videotape is the encounter by General Graham, commander of the National Guard, and Governor Wallace.
Because these National Guardsmen who are here today as federal soldiers are Alabamians, and they live within our borders, and they are our brothers. We are winning in this fight because we are awakening the American people.
George Wallace, by the way, was one of these politicians. He wasn't really. He was one of these politicians that just took any position as long as it was a popular position to get elected. He may or may not have been racist, but to him, I think the main reason he took the position he took at that time was because he wanted to get elected. He was one of these power for power's sakes, completely unprincipled politicians. But anyway, I'm trying to make a point here. Notice in this movie, for anybody who's seen the movie Forrest Gump, here we have one of these clips where they superimposed Forrest Gump onto basically a television clip. And this was like very, very crazy technology for the time.
Ma'am, you dropped your book.
Governor Wallace did what he promised to do by being on.
So there's that. Going to the next one.
Now, the really good thing about meeting the President of the United States is the food. They put you in this little room with just about anything you want to eat or drink. And since, number one, I wasn't hungry but thirsty, and number two, they was free.
Okay, so let's go to
Congratulations.
it's television. Another one of these clips where they superimpose Forrest Gump onto the.
Very good, sir.
They try. I think at some point they're at, yeah, right
How does
here.
it feel to be an All-American? Very good, sir. Congratulations.
So they took a clip of JFK and they got Forrest Gump in there and they made it look really authentic. So notice
How do you feel?
they're trying to.
I believe he said he had to go pee.
And then that was an interesting clip because they actually used computer animation to move his mouth and stuff and all that. So that's very interesting. But I'll get to the point in a minute. Let's look at a third one. And it's this one. Okay, it's like 1980s now.
At an Oval
And
Office
wouldn't you know it,
ceremony.
a few months later, they invited me and the ping pong team to visit the White House. So I went.
It's called the Hotel Ebot. Oh, no. I know of a much nicer hotel. It's brand new, very much.
So this is another one of these clips. I don't know if this is an actual recording or if they've actually changed his mouth and his voice.
I'll have my people take care of it for you.
But they superimposed Tom Hanks on there. And then they go to this clip, where Nixon gives his resignation.
Therefore, I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow.
By the way, anybody who has a brain should know that there's a lot more to the Watergate scandal than just Nixon hiring a bunch of idiots to, do something really dumb. Everybody who has half a brain understands that it was a deep state operation with the help of the media. Okay, but that's besides the point. What I'm trying to get across here is that in the movie Forrest Gump, it's very much a movie about a man and his experience, and really it's a movie about history. And what's interesting about the movie is it uses a lot of TV clips. And to me, it almost feels as if they are reinforcing the fact that this happened, that Nixon resigned, for example, because it was on TV. And but for it having been on TV, it wouldn't have been, it essentially didn't happen. It certainly wasn't relevant and not worth knowing or understanding or even caring about. And this goes to how powerful a medium, a form of medium, television was in its time, in its heyday. And its heyday was essentially the upbringing and the early and late, even late adulthood lives of the baby boomers. And that's why to this day, not to pick on them too much, but I haven't picked on them in a while, they are the most indoctrinated, brainwashed, completely warped generation of all. And my only consolation today is that the kids barely know what a TV is. They don't understand what it's used for. They don't watch cable, and that gives me hope. But, you know, around the time the George Wallace clip was happening, or the, what was it, the university, with the black woman coming in to the school for the first time. I forget the name of that. Brown, something Brown. It was in Arkansas. Yeah, that was in Arkansas. So at the time that was happening, you know, the U.S. government was assisting the Indonesian government in committing genocide, political genocide, a political genocide of 2.5 million people. And that was happening at the same time. But it wasn't on TV. No one talked about it. So it might as well have never happened. The U.S. Liberty was attacked by Israeli planes or missiles. Wasn't on TV. Might as well have never happened. It just goes to show you how powerful and pervasive and insidious a form of media that television was. And it was easy to control, especially on a national level. Sure, you had your local public access stuff, but they had no reach, and they couldn't have any reach. There was no internet. So TV clips produced locally stayed local. The only thing that got national coverage was what was approved of by 3, or then by the 80s, 4 networks. And then cable started coming out, and that was quickly consolidated by Ted Turner by the 90s. And it kept consolidating throughout the 90s until everything on television was essentially owned by, 5 different organizations. And the same thing happened to radio. AM radio stayed pretty compartmentalized for a while, but no, it's not like that any longer. And Americans came to believe a fantasy that was pushed upon them. A lot of fantasies. But the main fantasy was that America was morally superior, economically superior, and militarily superior to every other nation. The only one that came close was, for a while, those damn Ruskies in the Soviet Union. And there's a generation of people today, the boomers, who will always, at some level, believe that. And they're never going to wake up from the daydream or the fantasy or the blissful dream that is what they have been led to believe in their lives. They're too vested in the fantasy. But the rest of the world is waking up from the fantasy. And today I woke up and I was delighted to see that another domino has fallen in Africa. And this one was quite unexpected. Now, if you go on Google News, you search, you're not going to see any mention in the headlines that Gabon is an OPEC nation. So we just had a large uranium producer go rogue on France, and this one also a de facto colony of France. Here in the article somewhere, and just look at this article, they mention that there are several French resource extraction companies in Gabon. And they went rogue today. And now France has a more serious problem, probably an intractable one. But why now? Why are these dominoes falling now? 2 in the last 6 months? Let's look at this. Pause it for a second. Is it going to pause? I guess it won't pause, will it? I don't know how to pause it yet, so I'm just going to finish the video. Why now? What's changed? I mean, in short, it's very simple. This is all because of the war in Ukraine. The ultimate root cause of at least the Niger and the Gabon is right here, and Niger, or Niger, I should say, is right here. I think Mali went rogue last year, or maybe in 2021. Guinea, Bissau, or was it Guinea? Guinea went rogue. Burkina Faso went rogue. Guinea went rogue. Then I don't know which one came first. I think it was Guinea first, then Burkina Faso, then Mali, then Niger, and now Gabon. And you notice Gabon's kind of far away from Niger. I don't know if they're part of ECOWAS or whatever, but I would think they're a little more far removed from all of this drama, but maybe not going on there. I really wish Congo would go rogue. I have a special place in my heart for Congo. There's a place over here. Let's find it. I used to be able to find it pretty easy. There's a place. Oh, yes. This is one of the most beautiful places in the world. Take it from somebody who's been there. Just look at the topography. And there is a volcanoes. There's a volcano right here. Nyiragongo. So anyway. Very beautiful. And beautiful people with good values. So, what changed? And I would submit right now, just to make this video not too long. We're already at 13 minutes. That the real catalyst, let's just say the catalyst for this latest spat of coups in Africa and this rejection of the liberal world order, as they were calling it for a while. They haven't said that for a while. I think they're embarrassed to say it because it's such a ridiculous phrase and everybody knows it. It was Ukraine. And why would the war between Russia and Ukraine have caused, or have at least been a sort of catalyst, maybe an indirect one, for the coups in Africa? And the reason I showed those clips in the beginning is because for 40, 50 years, from the end of World War II until the mid to late 1990s, history was controlled. The only things that would be, history was determined by what was shown on television. As I said, lots of things happened in the world around the time of, in the 1960s. There was a very unfortunate, and I like to harp on this because literally no one knows this happened, a political genocide in which a right-wing government, with the help of the United States, murdered about 2 million people in Indonesia. But that wasn't on television. And it wasn't a conspiracy. It wasn't secret. Everybody else in the world knew it was happening. People in Australia knew it was happening. People in India knew it was happening. People in Saudi Arabia, people in China knew it was happening. People in the USSR knew it was happening. But literally no one in the United States knew it was happening because it just didn't get any coverage on television. You would think 2 million people being killed in about a year and a half would be on the news, right? No, because the United States was part of that whole thing. So history was determined by what was on TV. If it wasn't on TV, boomers don't believe it actually happened. Gen Xers are a little bit different, but they might as well be boomers. But as the internet comes out in the mid to late 90s, in the 2000s, it starts to gain traction. Then social media starts in the late 2000s. Now information is going unfettered. This is why you're seeing this latest information war, this real struggle for control of information happening between state actors and people who would consider themselves, free speech people. Because the states, the various states of the world know that they were only able to maintain, especially the United States power structure understands that they were only able to maintain their power and grow their vast wealth because of their control on information, and they know they're losing their grip on it. And really, what's happening in Africa is kind of the latest chapter in that saga. Not because people in the United States understand what's going on in the world, but the rest of the world, all 6 billion or so people in the rest of the world outside of the United States, Europe, Australia, Japan, basically the United States vassals. The rest of the world understands exactly what is going on. The cracks in the image of the United States really start to show, I would say, towards the mid to late 90s with the bombing of Serbia. With the bombing of Serbia, the starving out of Iraq with the sanctions in which millions of people died. People around the world started to say, maybe the United States isn't such a good guy after all. After the Soviet Union fell apart and the United States no longer had a pure power to check its expansion and its bullying of the rest of the world, of course, what does any bully do on a playground where nobody's willing to fight back to them? They just go around and bully people until eventually someone's going to stand up to them. Well, the United States destroyed Yugoslavia, and with culminating in the bombing of Belgrade by NATO, a defensive alliance, by the way, destroying the Chinese embassy. They literally fired a missile at the Chinese embassy in Belgrade. The United States did. And killed a bunch of people, as far as I remember. And said it was an accident, by the way, which very few people actually buy that. Then we were starving out Iraq in between the first and second Iraq wars. Then we actually invaded Iraq. And I think it was with the invasion of Iraq that really Russia, who by this time Putin was in power, really started to take a stand and say, this is about oil. This is a ridiculous invasion. And everybody knew it at the time, except for Americans. Now, nobody today will admit it, but 80% of Americans were for the invasion of Iraq. It's right there. Just look it up. Gallup poll, 2003. Now nobody will admit it. And then following Iraq and Afghanistan, nobody had so much of a problem with Afghanistan at first. But Iraq was a big red flag for people everywhere else in the world, except the United States. Then you had the Arab Spring and Libya, Tunisia, Egypt, Syria, and of course, still, the dumb civilians in the United States weren't the wiser because the media here is completely controlled. But we started losing our control of information overseas really in the late 90s, early 2000s, and that accelerated into the 2010s. And people around the world started saying, wait a minute, this is not right. But nobody really wanted to stand up to the United States until Russia took Crimea in 2014. And even then, Russia was very cautious, took Crimea, stayed out of the Donbass, tried to do a diplomatic agreement, and they were led down the garden path by the Europeans and the Americans in the background. And it wasn't until February, I think 24th, 2022, that someone in the world decided to stand up to the United States and say no more, and that was Russia, which is, which was predictable. And the rest of the world, including and especially Africans, where there was starting to be a movement, an anti-colonial movement in Africa before the invasion. Let's not forget Guinea, or was it Guinea-Bissau? One or the other. I think Burkina Faso might have happened, or Mali, one or the other might have happened before the invasion. But the rest of the world saw that Russia was standing up to Ukraine. And I think it was like all the kids on the playground started to back up the person that was fighting back against the bully. It's like, when someone finally stands up to the bully, and then all the other kids in the playground come out and say, oh, yeah, you're an asshole, you bully. Yeah, you kick his ass, And that's what happened. And I think the domino effect isn't done yet, because as the war has gone on, all of these ideas that the U.S. can just cause Ukraine to win with their Wunderwaffen, their wonder weapons, have proven to be, in fact, all hype. And the American military-industrial complex and the European military-industrial complex has turned out to be mostly hype. Not because Ukraine is losing so much, it's just how these weapons are being destroyed and proving ineffective. The Stinger missiles were quickly countered by the Russian Air Force. The only thing the Stinger missiles can hit is helicopters. And that was the case in Afghanistan, by the way. The Javelin missiles, the Ukrainians have complained about that. Pretty much every game-changer weapon has proven to be far from a game-changer. The HIMARS. And the rest of the world sees this, and they're looking at the conditions of Europe falling apart from their self-imposed sanctions. These sanctions were supposed to be designed to affect the Russian economy. They're affecting the European economy more. And West Africans and all these former French colonies are like, we don't have to listen to you anymore. We're gonna go talk to Russia. We're gonna go talk to China. We don't respect you anymore. World politics, geopolitics is about raw power. It's you can't bullshit your way into influencing other nations geopolitically. You can only bullshit your way so much. At some point, you have to show raw power, and you have to show competence, and you have to show competence in leadership. And you have to, in order to have relations with other nations, you can't talk out of both sides of your mouth constantly like the United States tends to do. they stop respecting you and they stop listening to you, and they say, the Russians aren't perfect, the Chinese aren't perfect, but we're going to go talk to them because more often than you, at least, they do what they say they're going to do. And not everything to them is a scam. At least not so much as the United States. So my point of this is the rest of the world, the United States is, especially, the older generations, they're still in the daydream. They're still in the fantasy that's been pushed upon them by the media over their entire lives. And really, the younger generations are so crushed by the boomers at this point, they don't care. And the rest of the world is saying, the United States is on the decline. China said this years ago, by the way. They put this on their strategic planning, which is available online. They said, we're just going to wait out the United States because they're going to decline. They're falling apart. They're corrupt. They have no economy of substance. And they said this a while ago. Meanwhile, the Russians have been destroying every American weapon or countering every American weapon put on the battlefield in Ukraine. And everybody knows that the United States not only isn't going to put troops into Ukraine, but even if they did, chances are the Russians would beat them. And everybody knows that. And everybody's saying, I don't have to be bullied by the United States and Europe anymore. And they're starting to turn eastward instead of westward. So that's where we're at, I think. And it's only going to get worse because we have people running this country right now who would rather drive the truck off a cliff than stop and admit that they were wrong. Because at least if they drive the car off the cliff, there's a chance they're going to survive, a small chance. But they know that if they stop the car and they get out, their political careers are over. This is how politics works. Throughout history, when politicians make mistakes, they start stupid wars and get a lot of people killed and everybody hates them. Do they ever admit it? Did LBJ admit it? Did Truman admit it? Did Woodrow Wilson admit that he made it? Even though, technically we won the war, he was still very unpopular. But let's look at the wars that, did Bush admit that he made a mistake and try to make overtures to fix what he had done? I mean, he might, strangely, his legacy has been rekindled. But, at the time, he might have had concerns for his legacy. Maybe he just didn't care. LBJ had expressed a lot of regrets for not stopping the war. I think even while he was president. But he wouldn't do it. Truman, the war in Korea was very unpopular. And I'm not sure about this, but I think he could have ran for another term. Instead, he chose to walk away from it and not admit he was ever wrong. And he let 20,000 more men, Americans, die instead of calling for a ceasefire and admitting he was wrong. This is the behavior of politicians because they're generally sociopaths and they have nothing to gain by admitting they are wrong. I mean, if there was a chance that Truman could have gone to jail or been executed or whatever for what he did, then perhaps he would have done something. But he knew that he could just go home and he can just get in his station wagon and drive back to fucking Omaha, Nebraska, or wherever the fuck he was from, and he knew he would never be, held accountable. So he let 20,000 more men die in the year of 1952 instead of admitting he was wrong. One of the first things Eisenhower did when he got into power was immediately send delegations to the Chinese, the Soviets, and the North Koreans. So I think this can only get worse. And Americans have a lot of waking up to do. So I am out.